Welcome to Fearless Females, where ambition meets resilience. Meet your guide, Lorie Jones, owner of Fearless Financial Advisors. Join her and remarkable women executives as they uncover the triumphs and transformative moments shaping extraordinary careers. Ready to be fearless? Let the journey begin.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Fearless Females. Big shout out to our sponsor, Fearless Financial Advisors. Check out the website. If you don't mind, wherever you're listening to this podcast, just like or follow or subscribe or whatever it is that the button says that you do, so that we can grow the listenership and get these stories to more people. So today we're chatting with Danaya Wilson, and I really loved one thing that she said that struck me, which was she was talking about micro progressions. And she actually is an author. She wrote a book called Changemakers Wanted. And she talks a little bit about this in the book too, where it's just the idea of making small incremental changes, just doing little things, 1% changes done over a long time kind of compound into massive impact. And you guys can already tell how come I love this idea, because the idea of as you compound your savings and you compound your interest in finance, you don't see that change over the first 5 or 10 years that you're doing it. But as you go along, that compounding interest just is magic. It is literally magic how cool it changes and grows if you just let it do its thing. And the idea of these micro progressions are so similar, because as you do these little things day in and day out, you may not notice the change incrementally. You might have to journal it or keep a book that reminds you that you made all these changes. But as you look back over 5 years, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, you will really see significant impact in your life. And I love that she brings this out and kind of talks about just doing the little things, because sometimes I feel like, well, those big things are hard and they look like a lot of effort, and I'd rather sit and sip my Diet Coke and, watch some trash television. But if it's just a little tiny thing that doesn't take very long, I could do that all day, every day. So let's get started. I hope you find Danaya's story just as interesting as I did. I'm excited today. We are here with Danaya Wilson, who is CEO of BetterCertify and an author. I've started your book. I'm over halfway through, but not quite yet finished. And I just love your message. So I'm really excited about this conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. So this question is interesting always for my authors, because my first question is always, I'm a reader. What is your favorite book?
Oh, let's see. So after writing a book, everything changed, because you start to look at things very differently. So if I say one of my favorites before writing a book was Educated, I really liked Educated. I liked American Dirt was another really good one. I tend to like first-person stories that are written in a way that, I guess to use the word twice, is very educated, but is able to take you through this immersive journey, even though the topics were so heavy and hard. And then after writing, I really enjoyed, I don't know if you've heard, it's I Who Have Never Known a Man. That one, it's a super weird book. It's not a book that you want to read if you are looking for a story that is packaged up nicely and completed. You're definitely left after reading that book being like, well, what happened? But the writing and its kind of feminist undertones is very exciting. I very much like that. And it's a quick read too. I think it was only a couple 100 pages. Certainly nothing like, what the fiction, the fantasy novels are coming out with, 500, 700 pages. So that one I very much enjoyed. And then what I'm reading right now, I'm reading Women in Power by Mary Beard. I just started that one, literally just read the first page last night. So I'm excited to get through that one.
You're a reader like me then, huh?
Yes, I know. I was like, wait, I'm actually reading right now 5 books, but I never used to do that. I used to only be able to start and finish. And then, then I would look at a different book. But after writing, it was like, I can't get enough. It's just such an exciting experience. And so I want to just be present in everybody's words.
Oh, that's cool. That's neat. It's interesting how you say you started one way and then like after writing a book, it just completely changed like what you read and who you were and the way you read.
Yeah. Well, and I would liken the experience a little bit to if you did something different. Like let's say you went and you skied for the first time and you're like, I really enjoyed skiing. And then all of a sudden you started to see yourself like now you're watching skiing on the TV and now you're reading books about skiing and you're joining a ski club and that's kind of how it feels like for me. It's like I found something that I have a deep passion for, have always enjoyed reading. But now that I've gone through this experience, it's like I want to embody it in every part. And I'm really energized by that.
Huh. So you're telling us all we should probably write a book.
Get on it. Get on it.
So tell me a little bit about your journey, Danaya. Talk to me about how you got started and kind of how you progressed and where you're at today, what you're doing.
hmm So I graduated in 2007 with an undergraduate degree in marketing. And, facing the first Great Recession was one of the worst times to get a degree in a sector that was being cut drastically. And so I was struggling to find a job. And I was still living at home with my parents. And at the same time, they were pivoting out of their regular careers and starting up a company that does hazardous material abatement. So my dad was like, well, just work with us temporarily. I was like, great. That sounds like a good stopgap. I'll write your business plan. I'll help you with some marketing, and then I'll find what I'm meant to do is kind of my thought period or thought process at that time. And after running their, I was in their company for 8 years and started, admin, went all the way up to corporate branch manager, took the company from, $0 in sales to over 8 million. And it was a really fun experience. I learned a lot, but I was definitely not passionate about the work I was doing on a daily basis. And so, what I really wanted to do was make it so that I was able to travel more. And the hazardous material industry is very busy in the summer because schools let out, and then that's when a lot of the abatement work happens. So I switched to education side of the industry, and I really started focusing on the curriculum and allowing for remote options for this annual renewal requirement. I decided to get my master's degree at the same time. I got it in organizational leadership,
Mhm.
but I took an emphasis in curriculum development. And so, what that really inspired me to look at is like, how do we take complex things and then put them into course learning modules that are relevant and also applicable to the individual that is taking the training and commonly taking the training in an environment that is not in which they would be doing the work in.
Mhm.
And so learning how to almost translate a different language to the trades and being really effective at that. And then also working in advancing this little niche of an environment that I work in and allowing for remote options, which was something that really didn't exist at the time in which I started BetterCertify, which was in 2015. And I just started to see this trend where one, my students were driving 4 hours to get to a 4 hour class. And then two, we were seeing this really transient workforce that was almost chasing the work, as opposed to where, in the state that they lived in, where they started their career, they would just continue to do abatement in that state. We were starting to see workers that were going all across the country and needed certification and training that was valid in a broader area. So that's the secret sauce that we have is we work really hard to not only modernize what they're learning and make it more relevant, but we also provide for a remote or a more optioned method of training so that they can make a little bit better decisions on what is best for their learning.
That's kind of cool. So I've heard recently that like the TikTok generation, and I honestly have seen it in my life too, where my attention span goes from like, oh yeah, I can pay attention for hours and hours to like, you better entertain me in the first 2 minutes or I'm not watching your video sort of thing. So did that come into play when you were like coming up with this curriculum and stuff like that? Have you had to take into account learning styles and attention spans?
That was the biggest part is like a lot of times when you're looking at regulatory training, who has developed the training is the individuals that typically are aligned with the research or regulation, or maybe even like the enforcement side of things. And what is difficult with that is they're not the ones that the curriculum is written for. And so what we have to do, or the regulation is written for, it's essentially written for a plethora of stakeholders. So we have to take in account of what this individual is going to be doing with what are they responsible for, and then how are they going to be doing the work. They may be removing a particular type of asbestos, but what methods are they going to be doing that? Are they in an area where they're going to be using certain tools, or are they in an area where they have to maybe do multiple air changes because the requirement is different in that particular area? And so there's all these different levers that you have to, one, just be aware of, but two, predict and plan for. And it really takes more of an immersive learning experience, which is, I think, it does have a lot to do with attention spans, but I think that we can all agree that if there's something that we find interesting, we will dedicate the time and energy towards learning that. And it's really about that, finding what piques people's interest as well as what they can immediately understand that is relevant. Like, hey, I've come across this situation before. I definitely understand how this particular regulation plays into my day to day, and how it also, by abiding by that regulation, will keep me, myself, my family, and my loved ones safe.
Oh, that's so interesting. So, like making it relevant to who they are and what they're doing, applicable in their life, and maybe a little bit of storytelling too, to kind of show them how it works with them, how it's important to them in their lives and their families. That's so interesting. So, Danaya, tell me a little bit about the best investment you've made in yourself. Is there something that you've done through this journey? It's interesting that you came out of college looking for a marketing career, and you are doing a little bit of marketing, maybe, through training and stuff like that, but somewhere kind of different than you expected to be. But is there something that you've done that you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I did that. I just don't think I'd be where I'm at today.
Yep. That certainly would have been my investment in my master's degree. I didn't need it. I was already at the top of my industry and my market. I was making good money for my age. I just really looked at, I was already the most educated individual in my environment as well. Having a bachelor's degree was few and far between, especially in the construction industry. And so I did it purely out of, I want to learn more, and I would love to, one, just have that accolade, right? Like it's something that you carry with you for the rest of your life. But I really genuinely wanted to learn more and see if my experience was different, because when you're getting your bachelor's degree, you're typically not leading organizations. You're typically not in a position where you can immediately apply what you've learned. And so I was looking for that experience. And because I did that, it really allowed me to see, it opened up a door that, like, one, I needed to start my own business and I needed to pivot outside of what my parents were doing with theirs. But then two, really look at I think a lot of times when people are thinking about like where we should invest and what would be a good like entrepreneurial investment, they're looking for like the things that haven't been done before and the blue oceans. But typically what that requires is that they're going to new industries. They think that blue oceans exist in newer industries, and that, because of an industry being relevant or in commerce for decades, that everything's been reddened. And that's just not true. I looked at a very antiquated industry and identified ways that I could be impactful and influence change that would be very helpful to the industry as a whole. And also, nobody was doing it. And so had I not got my master's, I wouldn't have looked at that industry. And it was, to shine a little bit more light on it, it was because I had an assignment that said, like, look at your existing job and identify one thing you could do differently. And I took that very seriously. And I said, not just my job, but let's look at like the industry as a whole. If I was going to think big and be bold, how could I change this entire industry? And I started small, and that's what we're doing. And the hope is, we're 10 years old now. The hope is in another 10 to 15 years, looking back, we can say before we entered this industry, you didn't have access to modernized and relevant content. And now you do. And hopefully that allowed people to be more effective in their jobs and kept people more safe.
Yeah, and probably allowed more people to enter the industry as well that wouldn't have typically been able to if they'd had to make that 4-hour drive to do the training and stuff like that, huh? That's so interesting that you talked about looking at things that have been done the same way all the time. And you can make transformational change if you're looking at those sorts of processes and saying, hey, do these still serve us? Is this still, you don't have to come up with the new Facebook or the new Twitter or the new whatever tech. Like you can, it's interesting that you pointed out, you can change where you're at. You can make a difference where you are that makes real change and impact in people's lives.
Absolutely. And that can be broadened outside of entrepreneurship, but just civic duty. And when I started to look at, what inspired me to write the book was looking even more broad outside of my industry and saying, like, the world as a whole. And I had, at that time, I had a new baby daughter. And if I could change something for the positive in the world, what would that look like? And then taking that from this 1,000-foot view to the granular level, how would I impact that change today? And that was the whole premise behind Changemakers Wanted, which originally, the title was Rise Up, which, was a very strong call to action. But as I got through, the book, the journey, I realized that it was something that was so possible, but so large. I mean, we're talking about complete overhaul, like you said, looking at things and challenging that status quo, that I needed really strong change makers, women and the men that stand next to them, to say we're no longer going to continue with this trajectory and we're going to start prioritizing women.
Yeah. I love some of the things that you brought up in the book too, as you're looking at some of these industries that are very male dominated and saying, hey, it struck me as I was reading it and going through it that you have this overarching big vision for where you want things to go or where you see they could go, but you also give very practical, like little things that you can do to make change where you're at and in the situation you're in. Because sometimes it feels like it's just overwhelming. Like there's so much we have to do. There's so many big things that need to change to make it happen. I think that we get overwhelmed and then don't just don't do anything. But if we can look at those little pieces and make little changes in our lives and in others' lives and just take a bite-sized chunk and try it.
Yeah, I call them micro progressions, essentially. And we hear a lot in mainstream media right now about microaggressions. Essentially, it's this, way to kind of even the score when you're feeling that you're being wronged in some way. And, I think that if we're able to do these little tiny progressions that ultimately stack ourselves up. Did you ever play Lemmings? When it was like a 90s game, the Lemmings?
No, but
Oh my
that
gosh.
sounds interesting.
It was a really fun game, but also with like a sinister background. Essentially, your goal was to save a certain number of lemmings in each round that you went to. And each one of the lemmings had different talents. And one of them, the guy was a stair builder. So he would have a bag and he would, one by one, every single time he would build a step to wherever you needed to go. And it was a slow, arduous process. Sometimes you would get multiple stair builders at the same time. But it reminds me of that. It's like, we're not going to drag and drop a master stair into this level. What we're essentially going to do is work together on a community level and build by laying one brick at a time. And there's books upon books like Atomic Habits that was so impactful, talking about 1% changes done over a long time compound into massive impact. And I just think a lot of times we didn't look at that. We're not looking at that on a community level, on a societal level. We're looking at that more individual, like what can I do? And my approach was not only to ask what I could do, but also if we were able to get on the same page and build this collective of change makers, what could that impact really look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love that too, like the big picture view, or what we could build. And it's like building a cathedral, and you put your brick in, and you don't really see what the cathedral is turning out to be, and that your idea is to give people a picture of what you're going to build in the end, and how their little piece or their little brick fits into that, right?
Yeah, and to make a case for the importance that we need everybody to be involved. And that was the most kind of stark realization as I started to go through this. Like I said, I genuinely enjoy reading and I love the research process. I really approached this book as if I was writing a research paper, essentially, making sure that I didn't just answer the question of why there weren't a lot of women in leadership positions, particularly in male dominated industries, but what was the foundation that continued to support that to be true? And where was the data backing that up? And so as I started, as I progressed through this research process, I really noticed that a lot of women want this. And a lot of men want this, in the sense of like more women in leadership positions. It'd be lovely to have a pathway for our future generations, for our daughters, for our nieces to come up in leadership positions if they want to. But many either didn't know how to start or felt like it was too confusing to move forward. And they felt like, well, we're not being biased in our day to day, but we're not really sure how that looks like to be like now a proponent, to be someone that's standing on the same side. And so what I focused on with the book was building a view of what it could be, why it should be, and then how we can all together do that on very simple levels. Two of them were, addressing the childcare crisis, and then looking at instilling flexibility in our workplaces. And on those two small levels, if there were things that were changed in order to have more flexibility, especially for working parents, especially for individuals later in life, like women that are caretaking for older parents, or they're going through menopause and experiencing a lot of hormonal changes, having this human first mentality significantly impacted their workforce and their community.
And then we get to keep that talent in the workforce and not lose it to, caretaking duties or some, health scares or something like that. So I think that's so interesting. I love that. Danaya, what's the worst advice someone gave you? Did anyone give you some really bad advice, and did you take it?
I will say something that's very relevant right now. I think that imposter syndrome is very real. And I have heard a lot of individuals that I really find inspirational say that it isn't real. And I really I have been so laser focused on change and impact that sometimes, because I have so much work to do, I haven't had time to feel the weight of not trusting myself, essentially. And all of a sudden, 10 years in my company, I started to feel that huge weight of doubt. And I think a lot of it came up with writing the book. And so the advice I would say was that when you're feeling doubt, immediately get someone on your team, like a consultant, that could see things in a different light and would guide you through this. And ironically, I very much did that in multiple cases, spent tens of thousands of dollars. And hindsight, what it came back to was that my leadership, my vision is the secret sauce in a lot of what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And trusting myself, certainly giving myself the room and time to feel what doubt feels like and fear feels like, but see it in the light that these are very real emotions and thought processes that should go along with doing big things, right? Like you would expect this when you are standing at a cliff and jumping off and hoping that something big is going to happen. And just trusting that not only is it expected that I feel like this, it's welcome that I feel like this, but I also am able to face this on my own with my team, but I don't have to seek outside approval, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
So the idea behind the consultants is that they give you courage, or are you saying that we shouldn't have outside consultants to kind of help us?
No, definitely not. If you're hiring, so like it really came down to the mindset behind why your business decisions are being made.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking at hiring a consultant to provide a very different view, great, perfect. That sometimes is very helpful, especially when you maybe like my team, we're small, so we don't have the funds to be able to have a full suite C-suite. So it's nice to be able to have fractional people. But instead, what I was doing was I was hiring experts around me to make myself feel better, to basically encourage me when I was feeling doubt to come in and say, no, you know what you're doing. You're okay. And realizing that instead it was these heavy emotions and it was this imposter syndrome allowed me to be more true in my business and more present. And I don't think that we really think as entrepreneurs, as women, what is that motivating emotion behind what we're doing and how does that impact our day-to-day choices? And so like really that advice that when you're feeling scared or when you're feeling confused, hire a solution out may not be the best advice, especially for me in this particular season that I'm in.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that when you're doing something big, those emotions are there and they kind of should be there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the idea behind fearless is you're scared to death and you do it anyway.
Absolutely.
You try it because I've never had anyone on the program that has said, I regret trying. I have had a lot of people that have said, I regret not trying. I regret not pushing through that fear or pushing through that scared feeling or pushing through that imposter syndrome to really get to the other side to be who I can be. Some of them have failed and they've learned from that, but I've never had anyone tell me that they regret trying.
Yeah, it's very true. I learned a lot about that. I have a really strong anxiety disorder, and I am a huge advocate for talking about mental health. And so far that I had, borderline agoraphobia, where I was struggling to even exit my home. And what ended up helping was, I built a team and had a team of therapists and medication and exposure therapy, but it was these little small steps of trying and continuing to, okay, I'm uncomfortable with this for 5 minutes. If I can do 5 minutes, I can do 10. If I can do, and I talk a lot about that in the book with doing exposure therapy with flying, because ultimately my first panic attack happened on a plane. So I developed a really strong phobia around that. And I think that there is so much power and so much joy in that process of trying and then proving to yourself that you can do it, especially when all of those thoughts and that inner dialogue is somewhat against yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Scared, hard, why are you even trying, that sort of thing. And yeah, overcoming that. I didn't ever think of it that way, but that's true. Like overcoming your own fears, a lot of times you're your own worst critic, and overcoming that is the first step. I think that's so interesting. Thank you so much. What about a situation that if you knew then what you knew now, you would handle that situation totally differently? Anything like that?
Of course, as you mature, you look at situations a lot different. You have a very mature eye when you're looking at the way that you converse with people. I feel like I was in the prior organization, my parents' organization that I worked with. I think I took a lot of abuse from my employees in ways of just being demeaned and talked over. That taught me a lot of lessons, but hindsight, I think it did a lot of damage. And I would have spoke up for myself now. But at that time, I was not only the boss's daughter, I was trying to make best of a situation that I felt like I had been handed, the state of the economy, and also wanting to be there for my family. I genuinely wanted my parents' company to do well. And so I took a lot of this disregard and poor treatment because I believed that this was what I needed to do, like my investment in order to getting a different position. And I don't think that's true. We don't have to be abused to earn our role or, our place in any environment. And that's the part that really I would have done much differently. But I don't know that, I didn't know that at that time.
Yeah. So how would you have changed the way that you reacted in those situations?
I certainly would have advocated more for myself, and then I would have been able to give myself the opportunity to pivot, to exit this environment, because I didn't have to stay. There was no reason why I absolutely had to at that time. Like, I didn't have a family. I was just providing for myself, and I easily could have accepted a different role. But I think that sometimes we think of pivot and change as something that's so negative that it's often predicated by a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And so we hold on so tightly to these situations that may be really bad for us because we don't want to go through that. And I would have changed. Sure, it would have affected where I am today. Absolutely. But I think it would have been really important to younger Danaya to say at that point that I mattered. And unfortunately, I didn't learn that until much later.
That's so interesting because I come across those situations in my life as well, where I work primarily with young women, as far as like the building them up in the mentorship and stuff like that. And I see them in these situations that just they're not helpful for them. They're not growing in the way that they want to grow. There's no mentorship. There's no support. There's no help for them becoming who they want to turn into and who they should turn into. And yet they cling to this job. They cling. And sometimes really valid reasons, like they need a paycheck, right? But I think it's so interesting that you're like, that sometimes we are in that situation and we don't see that we have options there, that we could change that situation. And it's not bad. It's not, in fact, when we make that change, and I love that I'm using the word change a lot because your book is Changemakers.
Yeah.
but when we make that change, and it really does, it opens up a whole new life for ourselves. But we cling so hard to that situation that just isn't right for us.
And I kind of talk a little bit about that in the book, and I tell the story of my father, because sometimes the circumstance outweighs the power that we have to be able to pivot and change. So in his case, he had 3 daughters by the time he was 25. So asking what he wanted to do in his career to earn money was not the determinant on whether or not he was going to take a job. It was what's going to pay and how can I get as much money as possible, kind of thing. So if you're faced with circumstance that outweigh that and make it heavier and harder to make decision, then you are in a situation where you are clinging. But if you're a young woman coming up and you don't have family and your circumstance is where you're able to maybe take less or maybe change quicker, I say do it, because what a world we live in that we can sit here and say, what really inspires me? How would I be able to give my gifts to the world and have them be accepted? Because at the end of the day, what we do for work, we all know, is a third of our life and sometimes more. And if you looked at it from that lens, what do I want to spend a third of my life doing? And then also understanding that when you get into that, if you are in it and you're like, gosh, I invested so much into this, you also have the power to say, like, this is no longer serving me. This is no longer something like it's okay to invest everything into something and then decide, well, I did it, but I didn't particularly enjoy it. And I'm going to go and do something else. And I think allowing us to have, that flexibility with ourselves and that fluidity with being able to go on this journey of life will make it so that we're able to make decisions that best serve us.
Yeah, I like that idea. Did anything scare you when you first started out on your career or during this process? And does it still scare you, or did you learn how to deal with it?
Oh man, so many things scared me. That I was very fearful and I found at that time I didn't like to acknowledge it, but I did find that was very real for me too. Again, like these emotions were real because a lot of times I would go into these environments where I didn't know if there was a contamination, like an active asbestos spill. I didn't know if I had, the appropriate PPE to keep myself safe. I didn't, I would be expected to go into confined spaces that, as having anxiety and not liking to be, clustered in a tight space, that was very nerve-wracking. But I would say outside of what would be real and true for most individuals, the biggest fear that I had was coming across as someone that didn't deserve their position. And when, because I was the daughter of the founder and the owners, it was looked like it was nepotism, essentially why I got my job. And I worked extremely hard. I studied really hard. I was definitely the most educated. And I think I had this deep-seated fear that someone would tell me that I didn't deserve what I had materialized, what I had created. And what that ended up doing was encouraging me and giving me that fire that pushed me through more education and more studying and longer work hours and really pushing harder. But I'm not so sure that was the best. I don't think that had I not had that fear, I probably wouldn't have lost myself so much in trying to prove it to people that ultimately I didn't care about, in the long term.
Yeah, I think about that a lot because I overdo a lot. I work long hours. I always am looking for more education and that sort of thing. And I enjoy it, but it does take time out of other pieces of life that could be more, fulfilling for me in the long run. So do you regret putting all that time? This is a question for me, honestly, because I'm wondering, was all that time and energy worth it just to prove that you could do what you know you can do, or not?
What I don't regret is the action. What I do regret is the reason. And so it's really looking at, again, going back to hiring the consultants and everything like that. If my reason behind my action is to prove my worth, is to pay someone to tell me I'm okay or deserving of what I am doing, then that's the part that I'm regretting. And I think a lot of women on like a broader scale, if we just knew that we were absolutely amazing, that we could do anything that we put our mind to, and that we're also very well versed on asking for help when we need it. Not, we don't always do it, but when we need to, when like, especially in business, we typically are doing that. We're good leaders. We lead the country in knowledge. We are getting the most secondary degrees. I think that if we just had the confidence that we ourselves are enough, then that would motivate a lot of our decisions, as opposed to feeling like, one, there's scarcity in the workplace, meaning like there's not going to be a lot of leadership positions for women. So we're already kind of entering that with a mindset of like, well, we need to please, we need to outperform. And then two, we have this huge, I mean, just imagine, just from like a younger woman's perspective, and then a younger male's perspective, they're looking at their life or their career path, and one is linear and then one is somewhat linear, and then it's going to have like this possible unknown pause if they choose to have children. Mm-hmm. And then it's a little bit linear, and then there's, caretaking for parents or menopause. And so we have so many things that are impacting us as young women that we tend to say, okay, well, because we're going to have these pauses in our career, we're going to need to outperform and be very vigilant in the times that we can be, in order to make sure that we're best prepared for when these things come up. And even that is hard and heavy. And I think from an outside perspective, I very much see how I regret that weight is that onus is on women.
Mm-hmm. So did you face any unique challenges because you were a woman?
100%. In the industry that I was in, male dominated, and certainly in very numerous situations where I was the only woman at the table. The unique situations that I was faced with was doing a lot of the administrative, a lot of the planning. Anytime, especially coming up, when I started 2007 to now, there was a lot of tech changes, as we all imagine. Even going from having the conference phone to now having it, as easy on your own phone, but just having to know all the variations and the changing technologies, and being the only one that was tasked with the entire caretaking, the housework of the work environment. So much so that now when I'm in that same situation, I'm very big on prioritizing that women and men learn how to do these things, that they understand that the tasks fall to both genders, that it's not specific, because it is still prescribed, especially in, again, like my industry has shifted from 18% women to 20% in the last decade. So these things, just because there's progressive movements outside of the industry, doesn't mean the industry isn't lagging behind. And so in order for me to impact change that's going to kick that up from 20 to 50, I have to be really intentional, and I have to be really going against the grain, especially if I'm sitting in a room with 8 males and 2 females. I'm going to be the one that stands up and says, hey, John, can you do this? Or John and Jim, can you guys please arrange the lunch for the day? And not just think that, oh, well, women are really good at organizing, so I'm going to give them this role. But what does it do on a larger societal level? What does that role speak to women on telling them of what they're able to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is a lot of behind the scenes work that women do. They're usually a lot of times they're the note takers in the room. I can't think of a male colleague that unloaded the dishwasher in the office even once.
I know. Very true. Very true. Or clean the fridge, clean the fridge out. And it's those things that a lot of times, and I'll tell a story about this too, but a lot of times women are like, well, I just don't want to have the battle. Right. And I don't want to break this down to training a toddler, but it's the most relevant thing that I can think of at this point. And I was watching Jordan Peterson just did a 4-part series on parenting, and one of them was toddlers. And because we have a 2-year-old, that was something that's very relevant to us right now. And so I'm watching it, and one of the parents on there is like, it's really frustrating to me because I want to get to church on time. I want to be in, sitting in the pew at 9 a.m. And his advice is essentially like, when a tantrum happens or when there's, a negative behavior, you need to make space to master it. So essentially that means there's going to be times where you're late to church because you've got to pause and you've got to communicate. And she was just like, that's a non-negotiable. We have to be on time for church. And the way that he broke it out was that, how many times are you going to take this kid to church? She's like, well, hopefully for the rest of his life, right? But he said, like, we came up with like 400 times, right? And maybe 20 of those times you're late to church, but you're laying the foundation for behavior that's going to change and be impactful for the rest of this child's life. That is worthwhile. So when we take it in the context of looking at emptying the dishwasher or taking the gender out of the roles that we do at work, it is going to be hard. And that conversation in that space is going to have to expand. And a lot of times, if you're the woman like me leading that, you're going to be ostracized. You're going to be looked at as, oh, well, she's always the one that's going to have a problem, or she doesn't like men. And really what it is what we're doing is restructuring our work environment, and we're making a place for women and men to work alongside each other. Instead of looking at, well, women are good at this and men are good at this, and we're only going to continue to perpetuate this notion of putting them into these spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard and it takes time, but it will be so worth it.
Yeah. I love that you use the example of, like teaching a 2-year-old or teaching a toddler, or, that sort of thing, because I find that the same skills that I used as a parent, I say 100 times, I'm like, it's so much easier to empty the dishwasher myself than teach my 5-year-old how to empty the dishwasher. Like, I would rather 100 times do it all my own rather than teaching them how to do it. But if eventually it gets to the point where if I take the time and do the training right, then eventually I don't have to empty the dishwasher. Somebody else does it for me. So.
And I bring it back to that thing that you said earlier. Like, I never met someone that regretted trying. And it's going to be that if you're looking at your child's life from the lens of your child's now 20 and they don't know how to empty a dishwasher, and they're not doing it. You sure as hell are going to regret that. And so what you're doing is you're doing the hard work today for the future tomorrow. And that's the whole basis of the book is like, what can we do today to change the trajectory for women leaders tomorrow? And turns out it is a little hard, but it's not that hard.
What is the thing you are most proud of, Danaya?
Oh, definitely having my daughter.
Uh-huh.
I did not think that I would become a mother. I had a rough upbringing, and I had a very difficult relationship with my mother. And I thought that if I had a child, all that would be doing would be giving them this strong anxiety that I have. And how could I ever do that to a child? And being able to realized that I was going to raise that child in a very different environment than I was going to be raised in. And then that child was also going to be half of my husband and someone else that wasn't me, was really brave on my part. And I am so happy that I was able to go through that, because I get to learn from this little fierce monster every single day. And it is by far the greatest thing that I've ever done and been a part of.
Mm-hmm. And that's saying a lot, because you've written a book, you're a successful CEO. I mean, there's a lot of things out there that you've done. And I think that it's interesting that I ask that question all the time. And a lot of time I do get the answer, my kids or my children or something like that. And I think that it's that sense of we're helping grow the world, like, and we see the impact so much in our own lives and our own kids, but those same skills that you use to raise your daughter, you're using to make change in the workplace and to really make this world a better place. And we see it in our kids, but I think that flows out to the broader world and our broader position in it too. So I'm excited that you're change making that way, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Any advice for a young woman who's just starting down this path that you're already so successful at?
I'm going to go back to having that confidence. And if we don't have the confidence, then we do the research to make sure that we have those counter statements. So if, for example, you're saying, well, I'm not very good at that, then you counter that, or you question that. Well, what evidence exists for this? Is it just because I don't feel that I'm good at that? Or is it really true that I'm getting the feedback that I am not good at this? And then if it is true, how can I counter that? I think so many times women are told, like, get a mentor or make sure that you have the support. And again, that onus is on us to do something, to be better. And what if we just instead knew that we were coming to the table most likely with more than anybody else around us? We tend to over prepare and over show up. So let us just lean into that as being the bare minimum instead. And we're already ahead of the game. And then know that we have the confidence to analyze those thoughts that come in our head and justify whether or not, or question whether or not they're correct, and then therefore react that way, as opposed to reacting just by feeling unworthy.
Yeah, I find that so interesting, because a lot of times you'll just take what somebody says as truth, as gospel truth. They're like, you're not good at this. And rather than questioning and saying, am I really not good at this? Like, do the facts point to the fact that I'm not good at this? Or have I been in situations where I'm not good at this and this is something I need to work on and change? Or is that just someone's opinion?
Yeah. And like, are they even having a bad day? I think a lot of times by us just taking in less feedback and being able to really filter what is important. A lot of times, like, what guides us, we bring up TikTok and everything like that. What typically guides us is people that we don't even give any care about. And so what we really need to do is, like, is this feedback coming from a source that I even admire, or would my grandma even listen to? But yet, these are people like your grandparents and your family are typically people that you do respect. And so kind of just shifting that feedback attention.
Thank you so much, Danaya, for your time today and for sharing your journey and some of the things that you've learned along that path. I really appreciate it. If I have a young lady who wants to ask you questions or get more information or just touch base, how does she do that?
Thank you, Lorie, for having me. And also, I am very big at being available for the future generation. And so my website's danayawilson.com. My book is Changemakers Wanted. It's available everywhere, and there's an audio and Kindle version. And then I'm also doing a lot of speeches at leadership conferences. The next one is the Steamboat Leadership Conference, Women's Leadership Conference in September. So it'd be really nice to see people at that event.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.